afternoon. My name is Kim Lavings with Rethink You, and I'm truly humbled and blessed to be bringing you this event today. And thank you for those of you who have registered. I know some of you are signing in and still getting situated right now. We are recording this, and this recording will be available on YouTube. And I'm excited to welcome our panelists today. But just a little bit of background before we do that. The genesis of this story began as a result of my podcast interviews with several of our panelists. And I realized that they had powerful stories, not just about the problem, but also about the solution. And I thought people need to hear this. So I wanted to bring them to you today. So we're going to go through and discuss mental wellness for those who protect and serve. And I think it's a topic that the public in general would be good to know more about, whether it's EMTs or firefighters or police or our veterans that are either active or retired. There's just such a swath of people experiencing mental wellness challenges. And I wanted to have this conversation. So we are kind of tight on time, and you'll notice I'm going to keep the speakers on a fast clip here, but we're going to begin. And I did want to say, my name is Kim Lavings with Rethink You. I focus on helping people live fulfilled lives. You can find me on YouTube or Facebook. My accent is South African, so I know that we have at least one or two people on the line that come from the same heritage. The rest of you, I am speaking English. Just concentrate and you'll understand what I'm saying, right? So I'm going to begin by saying, tell us your name. I'm going to go around in order here and I'll call out your name and basically what you're focused on. Introduce yourself to the audience. And if the audience wouldn't mind, please make sure you stay on mute so we don't have background interruptions. And as the crowd gets bigger, we may end up being on more than one screen. So for 2 minutes each, I'm going to give each speaker an opportunity to introduce themselves, tell you who they are. All of their full bios are available on the website, of course, and they're going to have more time as we go through the discussion. So Scott, I'm going to start with you, and then after Scott, I will come to you, Don. You want to come off mute?
Good afternoon, everyone. First off, I'd like to thank you for hosting this and for all the panelists that I have the privilege to work with today. This is going to be a huge learning opportunity for us. My name is Scott Richardson. I've been fortunate to spend all of my adult life in the military and fire service. And this is probably one of the foremost problems that's not talked about in the military, fire service, law enforcement, and healthcare. And the good news is that there's a lot of positive ways that we can not only talk about it, but we can make an impact on it. So as we go throughout the podcast, I'll talk more about it, but I appreciate the opportunity to be here today.
Thank you, Scott. We'll go to Don, and after Don, I'll come to you, John.
Thank you. And thank you, Kim, and thank you, the rest of the panel, for the opportunity here to speak today and to share a few thoughts. I was a career Air Force guy in the medical career field most of that time, and I had the privilege of serving as the commander of a trauma hospital in Balad, Iraq in 2006. It was probably the most challenging leadership opportunity I've ever had in my life for many reasons. I'll share more of those here in a moment. But now I teach and lecture mostly in healthcare and consult in healthcare. And my focus is really on health, not a healthcare as a process, but outcome of health. And I believe embedded in our discussion today should be kind of a pivot to focusing on that health as an outcome rather than just more healthcare. Because healthcare to me equates to the business process. I'm really interested in wellness and outcome and positive results and reduce, frankly, healthcare in our processes and have people resilient enough and teach them and create prevention enough to protect ourselves against traumatic events in life, which vary by each individual. So thank you for the opportunity today, and I'm eager to talk about some things later.
Great, thank you. I'll go to John, and after John, I'll go to you, Dr. Shawna.
Thanks, Kim. Honored to be here today, and I'm humbled to be amongst this panel. And I see some usual suspects online outside of the panel as well. And Kim, Barry will understand your accent. Barry is from Rhodesia originally, and actually fought in the Bush War. So he and I, or you guys, have similar accents. Anyhow, John McCaskill. I'm here in Colorado Springs, just down the road from Kim. And I'm a former Navy SEAL, retired Navy SEAL commander, served in the Navy for 24 years, 17 of which was attached to the special operations community. And now I teach mindfulness and meditation, with my why being to help people find their most fulfilling lives. So it's very similar to yours, Kim. We may need to deconflict our whys there. But yeah, so again, honored and humbled to be here. So that's that.
Thank you. Dr. Shauna, and then we'll go to Joe, last but not least. Joe, hopefully you've had a minute to regroup. Poor Joe's just come out of traffic. So let's go to you, Dr. Shauna.
Hi, I'm Shauna Springer. I am a licensed psychologist known as Doc Springer in the military veteran tribe, and I serve veterans, first responders, and really all people. I have a blog on Psychology Today, many years running, called Free Range Psychologist. And I think out of that philosophy, I've really been outside of a clinical space. I just got back from an area just on the Fort Hood area, on a live artillery range with a circle of warriors just a few days ago, really helping them walk through grief and trauma, all kinds of things that come up. So I'm an author. I've written a book called Warrior: How to Support Those Who Protect Us. And that is from my heart for all of the warriors I serve and those who love them, to help people develop insights about a range of things that warriors have shared with me based on the trusted partnership that I've enjoyed with them for many years. So I'm happy to be here, and I see Chris Norris and others that I know as well. So this is going to be fun.
Wonderful. Thank you. Joe, let's go to you.
Thanks, Kim. And it is an honor to piggyback on what everyone has said, that I get to be a part of this great panel. My name is Joe Smarro. I'm currently the CEO and co-founder of Solution Point Plus. We're a national training and consulting firm, and we cultivate mental wellness to maximize human capital and promote safety. My background is as a former Marine with 2 combat deployments, and then I was with the San Antonio Police Department for 15 years. The last 11 years of my time on the department, I served on the mental health unit, helped grow that into a nationally recognized program. We were identified as a gold standard under Obama's administration. And then I started a company back in 2017, where now I go around the country and I train our de-escalation techniques, tactics, ways to really connect with people that are in crisis, because my claim to fame is I went 11 years in the 7th largest city without using force one time. And so it is a teachable skill. And now I'm very fortunate because I was featured in an Emmy Award-winning documentary, Ernie and Joe Crisis Cops, which is on HBO. That's created a bunch of other opportunities that I'm really excited about that are happening over the next couple months.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joe. And I'm sure that the listeners by now are recognizing just how powerful this discussion is going to be. I know how to pick them. I found this group and I'm like, these people got to get around the table and have a conversation. So I definitely want to focus more on a conversation and less about my questions. And I'm here simply to usher in a message that I believe people can learn from. So from my perspective, I know that our people at the front lines, whether that's as soldiers or first responders, or fighting a fire, or being in life-threatening situations, I know that they're exposed to extreme stress. We all know that. And we all know too that they may suffer from mental health challenges, and people tend to put them all in the PTSD bucket because they don't know where else to put them. And I know that there's several different buckets, not just one. And in my age group, I came from South Africa, and our soldiers were conscripted out of high school. They fought the Bush Wars. And I had a boyfriend once who we said he was bossies. That was our term for somebody who had bush brain. I mean, Barry would know what that means. So we'd just say, oh, the guy's bossies. It basically means he's got challenges, but nobody really spoke about it. And I remember going back to the First and Second World Wars, they talk about shell shock and other issues. And my father was a veteran and never spoke about his experience. He said, I keep it in a black box and that's where it'll stay. And that was their stoicism towards their experience at World War II. And from a young age, as a teenager, I actually worked in the pub at the local show hall where all the veterans hung out. And so I kind of grew up listening to war stories. But having done all of that, I realized that regular people like myself and many others don't fully understand the extent of the issues. And we say to somebody, gee, well, thank you for your service. And it feels that that's all we can say because we can't possibly begin to understand. So in this discussion, I actually just want to throw out a question and have anyone, answer the question as we go. But my first question is, why do you think the general public at large is so unaware of this topic? Why are they so blind to the issues? And anyone can respond.
I'll respond. I guess I'll jump in and start us off.
Please do.
I think that for many people across the country, the things that not only warriors do, but first responders do are like Area 51 to them. I think they have no idea. Really, it's not out of a desire to be insensitive. They just really, literally don't have any idea. Right now, I'm working on a book with retired Sergeant Michael Sugrue, who is a police officer in the area where I live. And even for me, it's been eye-opening to learn about my area in a whole different way. The things that police officers and first responders see and do every day that most people just have no understanding of, right in plain view, And then you think about warfighters who go on combat deployments or other deployments, and their stories and the things that they go through and the bonds of love and trust that they have and the traumas and the challenges, the survivor guilt, the moral injury. It is out of sight, out of mind for most Americans. So I think people in this country really want to help and they genuinely care. They just really don't get it because they have no touch point and no visibility into the experience of our warriors and first responders.
Right. Thank you.
I think I would add to that the perspective and the awareness is something that leaders, whether it's in the military, fire service, hospital, wherever it is, leaders have the chance to make that a touch point. We do a lot of work at South Metro with our PIOs, and they actually they just did a piece on one of my paramedics that got assaulted by one of our patients, and he actually will not be able to come back to being a firefighter paramedic because of it. And it's about a 2-hour documentary on the trauma that it caused me as a battalion chief, my crew, the families of everybody involved, the other people on the department that have known this guy for 25 years. And it's to bring that awareness to the public and to everyone else, because we're the last ones to show that humility and that vulnerability and share what we go through. And, the stuff that we put on YouTube videos and is on our PIO channel is not the 7-hour extrication of a gentleman's remains before a flash flood comes, because that's not what we want people to see.
Right. Thank you for that, Scott. Yeah, there's perhaps a motivation to protect the public, but in the process, they keep them uninformed. So I'm sure it's a delicate balance. Anyone else want to weigh in on this, Don?
I've got a couple of comments. First of all, my point of view is a little different. I represent thousands and thousands of medics who served those in harm's way, and I look at their traumatic effects and their lifelong kind of burden they carry in a much different way. So understand that. That's my point of view. The other is that, we do all of this and we serve all these years, frankly, to protect our society from being exposed to everything that we've done. I don't want my children or my family and or my wife, who happens to be here as well, to see what we did. And it's a bit of a conundrum because I feel a responsibility to bear that myself and to internalize that and say, I'm tough enough to deal with it. Well, we aren't sometimes. And what we experienced, I don't want to share because it will be distorted, it will be politicized, or it'll be used in a different way to serve another means in this society. And it alarms me. I mean, I've done presentations on this in medical centers around North Texas and the state, and they're fascinated that they have no idea that serving in such a complex environment is even possible. And I just think we have to be a little careful, because part of it is we do this to protect the society, but yet we need the society to understand. It's a conundrum. Thank you.
It is. Thank you for that, John. It's an interesting perspective because, yeah, I think there is a balance that perhaps we, and as I said, I'm speaking as the voice of the public, perhaps we don't need to know all the gory details, but we need to know enough on how to support and come around and meet people where they are after they've been through a traumatic experience. But anyone else want to weigh in on this question before I go to the next one?
I would like to, Kim.
Yes, John.
Yeah, I actually would just like to add on to what Dawn mentioned, in that I think there's a part of us that is almost, for lack of a better term right now, almost ashamed of what we may have done, may have seen, may have experienced. And if it's not ashamed, sometimes it's just compartmentalized and put away in a box to be dealt with at a quote unquote another time. And that another time never comes. So we, as service members, and I imagine the same for first responders, are boxing that up ourselves and not letting those around us know what it is because we're ashamed, or we don't even acknowledge it ourselves. I know there are some things that I saw and did that I didn't even really acknowledge until years later, when I actually did some deep contemplative work, introspective work, and it bubbled to the surface. And I didn't even know that it had been bothering me for years. So I think there's a compounding effect in, one, we kind of hide it from ourselves. Two is, if we do acknowledge that we participated in something or didn't participate. I mean, there's even the other side of the survivor guilt in maybe we didn't participate in combat when we trained for combat for years and didn't participate. There's that side of guilt as well. And we don't acknowledge that ourselves. And then we can't expect society writ large to acknowledge it if we don't even acknowledge it ourselves.
Right. Right. Thank you for that, John. It almost goes to my next thought that, some people may say, I personally don't say this, but I know I've heard people say, well, they chose this as their career. Why is their mental health now our problem? And I think that, sure, that's a rather flippant, unfeeling response. And I know that many people think it, they just don't say it. They're like, well, you chose to go be a soldier. Why must I feel bad for you? You need to be strong enough to deal with it. So, there is that concept. But again, it's that balancing act between understanding what risk and dangers you're stepping into and being willing to do that as a calling. And then how do we take care of you when you've done what you said you were going to do? So I know too that there should be sort of professional service providers taking care of them, right? And is this happening? And if it is happening, is it happening in a good way, or is it not happening? Let's just hit that one right on. Saying, who wants to tackle that one? Or go back to the previous question if you wanted to weigh in.
I'll jump in on this one quick. So from both sides, I think I would say it's happening, but not as it should. The fact that it remains voluntary is an issue for me. I think, again, the part of the issue, in my opinion, and going back to the last question and tying into this one, is so much of military policing, everything is sensationalized. And so it creates this kind of skewed image of the reality of what's happening. The other thing is, for warriors, as they're called in the military, they're preparing for combat and all these things. They're trained for that mindset. There's not an equal effort put in to what happens after that. And, like John mentioned, it took him doing that introspective work on himself to really realize there's something that I've shoved way down in there. But so many people never get to that point because it's not part of the culture, right? We kind of have this culture of silence and suppression rather than this culture of wellness. In our argument is you can be both. You can be a warrior, you can be a badass, you can be, in special ops community, you can be a first responder, you can do all these things. And also you can be compassionate, you can have emotional intelligence, intelligence, you can have insight. It's this idea that you have to be one or the other. And so my argument has been within the policing world over the last several years is that every officer that gets hired into a police academy should be issued a therapist. It's not a voluntary thing. I think it should be part of the training. Like if you're going to go into the police academy and train, you should also have to talk through your situations, your life, your whatever through therapy, because there's so much trauma that happens very early on, and trauma is personal. It's not just for the warfighter. It's not just for the woman who survived a sexual assault. Trauma is everywhere, and it affects and impacts people differently. And so there's a fundamental lack of education and understanding by people all over the world about what trauma is, what it means, how it manifests in our behaviors. And I think especially with military and first responders, we really have to look at making it way more, not just available, but it should be mandatory that they have to go and talk to someone at least every once or twice a year.
I would agree with that, but I would add to that that it needs to be safe and that there should be no negative consequence from seeking that kind of support and guidance. And I think it's really ubiquitous, frankly, to hear messages like, it's okay to not be okay, or it takes courage to ask for help. And there's a real disconnect with what can happen if you go in for help and you're talking to somebody who doesn't get it, who isn't culturally informed or aligned with you. And there's consequences for your job, for your livelihood. So it's not a matter of courage. Warriors, first responders, they've already proven that. They have plenty of courage. The real thing is, could this result in consequences that impact them, that impact their livelihood, their status, their reputation? And I think we've been really unaware as a field, speaking, for my field, when we give that messaging, but we don't protect people and give them safe places to get help. I just spent the day yesterday with SEAC Ramon Colin Lopez and with General Hyten, the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And both of them are a good example of the kind of leadership that I'm so excited about, because both of them are people that lead from the front and they say, no, I have had struggles. And with General Hyten, he said, they said, we can bring you in the back door, sir. And, he said, no, take me in the front door and I'm going to go get help. And SEAC Ramon Colin Lopez said, if anybody seeks help and they get consequences, that he will have their back. And that's a commitment that he wants to make this a new chapter where people really are protected when they do go and work on themselves. It's the harder thing to do, to work on yourself. But we have to address the fact that realistically, for some people, there have been consequences, and they're not distorting that or making that up. So that's something we have to figure out systemically, I think.
If I could, to Joe's point and Shauna's, one of the things that we've started doing with some of the higher acuity, more vicarious trauma-laden calls, we do after action reviews all the time and hot washes, but we assign a battalion chief to every cardiac arrest, for example. And we ran a string of pediatric suicides, and a mother who committed suicide was found by her kids. And we're not sure if it was a suicide or a murder, or just a really bad string of calls. And that's the whole reason we send battalion chiefs to those calls. So they go to the hospital, we all work together. And then it's our job as the senior leaders to show not only the empathy and the compassion, but show the humility and talk about that it's okay for this to suck. It's okay for this to be really bad. And it's okay for it to bother you. And that's where some of those healthy modalities come in. But to your point, Joe, if we have the humility as leaders and we talk about that, it makes it much less of a stigma. I remember when I came back from the Gulf. Yeah, I love that. When I came back from the Gulf, I remember at the end of our quote unquote briefing at Fort Bragg, the young lady in the room said, hey, here's an 800 number. If you're feeling like something's bothering you, call the VA. And we all know how effective those were. So just my 2 cents on that.
Just a quick caveat, Kim, if I can add, because and I love what you said, Scott, and I'll tell you, this just one of my last experiences before I left the department last year. these officers had a horrific call, death of it was actually a homicide of a child and the mother, and it was a murder-suicide situation. And this was like the third one in 2 weeks. And it was a lot of the same officers. So same thing. The shift commander shows up. It's a captain, and she's a female captain. And she shows up, and right away she calls me and says, hey, this is what's going on. But she goes and asks all the officers, like, hey, I want you to know that we're here to support you. This is not normal. This isn't good. Like we want to be able to support you if you have needs. And like universally, the response was like, stop it, ma'am. Like, we're fine. We don't need anything. Like, we're not weak, da, 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 da. And I told her, I said, I think part of the problem is, sadly, you're a captain and these patrol officers feel like I have to be a certain way to impress my commander. And now you've got a female captain who is motherly and loving, right or wrong, whatever. But they're like, yeah, I'm not going to tell this woman leader that I need mental health help. No way. And so while I appreciate the effort, I think it's also important that we look at, is that the only option or the best way? Yes, it's important to show demonstration and lead. And one of the things I found too for running our own officer wellness programs for the agency was, we have a full-time mental health unit. We have 3 department psychologists for our department. We had a peer support team, pretty robust, and yet we had a string of suicides, 3 in 16 months. And so it was like, what's the disconnect? Well, the problem is, it's not about, like you said, don't give me a brochure. Don't give me a trifold brochure. Don't give me a 1-800 number. I know these resources exist, but I don't know that I can trust them. And I don't know how to use them. I had an officer, a 54-year-old officer, tell me, Joe, I don't know how to ask for help. And it broke my heart because I said, well, you just did by calling me and telling me that. He said, no, but even if I went to therapy, I don't even know how to ask for help. And it's just so sad to me that people think that there's like a right way to do it, or that there's some type of like script or narrative they're supposed to follow to ask for help, when really we can just show up and say, I don't know what the hell's wrong, but something's bothering me. I can't sleep. I'm just angry. Something's off. Like, it can be that simple, but they need people to demonstrate. And it's really about having those internal champions and advocates, not just about having all these flashy resources on a bulletin board.
Right.
Yeah, I need
and
to add.
Don, do you want to weigh in?
Yeah, I just would like to add to this about setting the culture. And it's so important in a leadership role to set the culture. Many, many years ago, when I was an emerging leader and had a pretty large squadron, and my standard procedure was I give them a business card with my personal address and my personal phone number, my home number, my cell. This was to everybody in my unit, all the way from first E1s all the way up. And my boss goes, what are you doing? And I said, I'm establishing a relationship. I said, if we have a culture of trust and they trust me, this will be important someday. Well, you never know. Well, sure enough, a few months later, I get a call 1 a.m. and it's a crying spouse who said, my husband just called me and said, he's going to take his life. And your card was the only thing I found on the refrigerator. Can you help me? We knew where he was. We dispatched the police and we intervened. And I not only saved him, but, I salvaged his career because he and I talked after that. My point is, and it's not about me. This is about establishing a culture where people are trusting of you enough to be vulnerable and to expose what they're thinking and what they struggle with. And it starts with little things. Have fun. For goodness sake, I used to put myself on the designated driver list as the commander. Now, I will tell you, that's interesting when you show up at 2 a.m. at a bar as the drive home. And my only rule was don't puke in my truck. That was my only rule. And I said, and after this, you'll never hear from me again. But that just became a culture where people could say, you know what? I'm feeling a little weird. I can talk to you. You've got to have that relationship. And it starts from the very first moment. And it's not just in time. And it has to be genuine.
Right. Thank you so much. Very
Kim,
good discussion.
Just jump in,
yes, John.
Quickly.
Yeah.
A lot of what we've talked about here is, setting an example as a leader, making sure your people know the resources that are available. And as Joe mentioned, sometimes people just don't know where to go. Sometimes, there's a ton of resources. It's confusing. There's a sea of goodwill out there. It's just not knowing where to go. But the other side of things is that's reactive. What can we do on the proactive side is, I think that we've got to make an example. So in the special operations, if somebody goes to the gym, they get a pat on the back and they say, hey, good job for maintaining your physical fitness. If they go for a run or a swim, the same thing. But if somebody goes and sees a counselor, everybody kind of turns and like, what's wrong with that guy or girl? You know, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong necessarily. You need to maintain mental fitness just like you maintain physical fitness. And that's where we need to change the narrative, is that as leaders, we can go and seek mental health support even when nothing is wrong, because we want to maintain our status of mental fitness, so that we are being proactive, so that when something does go wrong, so that when we do see something that shakes us, when we do something that shakes us, we've got tools. We know what we can do. So I think there's a lot of resources out there on the reactive side. We just need to also make sure that we're addressing things from the proactive side. And I just want to make sure we address that side.
Oh, absolutely. I think that's a very good discussion, because what's interesting is that we've uncovered the problem is complex. And I think, we've got the individual ego, you've got the lack of trust, you've got the good intent, but somewhat sort of fumbling the pass in terms of delivery of services. So it's not one problem that you could go out there and solve. And I think that, depending which veteran I talk to, I get all different perspectives on Department of Veterans Affairs, whether it's good, bad, or ugly, and everything in between. And it depends on each individual exposure and experience with VA. And I know that the VA means the best, so I don't want to lay all these problems at their feet. But I think that we've at least sort of looked at some of what the problems are. And then, the other thing, because before we sort of move off of the problem, because then I want to move into the solutions that you're working on, what other problems do you think are inherent in the system, in the support systems? What else is not working? And we're not going to stay here much longer, because those of you who know me, I hate talking about the problem. I want to get to the solution. But I think we need to talk about the current reality in these issues.
I think resiliency is something complicated, though, because a lot of the warfighters and first responders that I work with really privately dislike the term, because it suggests that, we know that we're all resilient until we're not. And sometimes people do not feel like they're doing okay on the inside. So I agree very strongly. My work is based on this sacred trust. I agree very strongly with Dawn that if you don't have the backdrop of trust and that relationship developed, that if vulnerability is not a practice for you in that relationship, it's going to be almost impossible to bring someone out of the woods when they're really struggling, because it's a bridge too far for people to say, I'm really not okay in like a deeply crisis sense, when you haven't all along established a conversation about the hard things, the things that induce shame, the things that really matter, that are most people would rather avoid. It really is about not so much messaging campaigns. This is not a battle we can fight from 20,000 feet in the sky. It is a battle that requires us to get up close to people and walk in the trenches with them and develop that kind of trust. Right. So it is complicated, but there are definitely ways to move in a new direction, I think.
Absolutely. And thank you for saying that, because I do think I want to move us kind of forward towards the solutions here. But interestingly, as you all know, I interview some very interesting people. And I had a fascinating interview yesterday that really plays into some of this discussion. And I would encourage those of you who are listening, so a shameless plug, in 2 weeks, this episode will publish with Dr. Larry McAvoy. He's about to publish a book called Epidemic Leadership. And he was an emergency physician, and he comes from that background, but just absolutely incredible insight in terms of starting epidemics of goodness, epidemics of positive outcome-focused behavior. And I think that epidemic leadership, whether it's intentional or not, actually applies to this topic as well, in that it's wonderfully encouraging, Doc Springer, to hear that at the senior levels that you mentioned, that mindset of this, take the stigma out of mental health, that's a huge win. Because if you can start getting that kind of stuff coming from the top, it's going to take a while to turn the ship around. As we've said, this problem is complex. So I'm encouraged by that. But let's sort of move forward and look at what solutions are you offering, because I know each of you in your own way is contributing to providing solutions that are outside of the norm. And I want to get some examples. And I haven't forgotten about Douglas's comment to do with resilience. And just for me to explain to the audience, because I hate cutting people off, I do want to let the panelists go through the questions that we have so we can get a full round discussion. And we have got time towards the end, or you can put your questions in the chat. We have a moderator who is catching questions and sending them to me. I'll make sure that we address them in the applicable sections. So I'm going to move forward though, if that's okay, unless any of you have final comments on the panel about the problem before we leave all the icky and move forward to the hope and the future. Good. All right. I'm going to actually start with you, Don, because seeing I said you were the one that spurred this idea in the beginning. You shared a story of how you handled your troops when you were deployed in Iraq that absolutely blew me away. And that was one of the first stories I felt compelled to share. And that led to the entire panel. So I'd love you to retell your story of how you managed your situation. I never know what to call things. So I'd rather just say your people.
Okay.
Instead of making an error.
Great. Well, thank you. And I'm going to, what I want to do is share with you a challenge I personally had when I was offered the opportunity to command and a medical unit. And at the time was the busiest trauma center in the world as the first non-physician to ever command there. It was a challenge in itself because it had been perceived as kind of the hobby shop for trauma surgeons, which was a cherished position. However, when I thought that I had an opportunity to lead there, I actually lobbied to go. And some of my peers said, how can you ever do that? And I said, I've sent too many kids already. I have to do it myself. And I was in my 50s at the time. When I deployed, I was the old man. But I had to do it. And I did that similar to my buddy, Doug, who did the same thing in Afghanistan. So I just want to share with you, when I was first challenged with this opportunity, I thought I really sat down and thought, what is it I need to do? And what is it I'm most concerned about? Well, I will tell you what it was. I was worried about the visual trauma. I have a weak stomach, guys. I was in healthcare, but I was in the front hallway, man. I didn't hang out in the emergency room. And this was something I'm going to have to face. I said, but what else do I have to face? Am I afraid? Yeah, I'm afraid. A lot of the times getting, rocketed about 3 times a day, even though people call it Camp Cupcake, and rightly so. But dang, you still can get hurt there, and people did get killed there. But I was worried about the medics and their experience and what they would feel and see. So I had an opportunity at the time. I was the vice commander at Wilford Hall in San Antonio. So I had an opportunity for about half the team who happened to be assigned there, do a commander's call, bring everybody in, let's talk. I started setting the culture 2 months out. 2 months ahead of time, I said, we start our prevention journey. I didn't know it. They didn't know it. I was actually beginning to do what I call post-traumatic growth before we were ever exposed. And I said, I'm going to share with you the things I worry about. So everybody's in the audience. I stand on stage. I look down, and right in the middle is a general surgeon who I just chastised at the golf club 2 weeks ago for wearing his scrubs outside of the building. He looked up and goes, uh-oh. And I immediately called him out by name from the stage. And I said, we're going to have a lot of fun, aren't we? Well, the room laughed. It set a tone that I was approachable and that we were going to be in this with a humane point of view. And then I got tough. I started showing visual pictures of trauma, real life trauma, massive injuries, kids. 6 people got up and threw up, had to walk out of the auditorium and throw up. I said, I want you all to understand, you will have to see this within 1 hour of landing, and you will have to save lives immediately because we only have one measure of success, save lives. That's it. That's our only performance. My job is to keep all the crap away from you. I said, so I expect you to perform. I expect you to be fully accountable. I expect you, no training over there. There's no such thing as on the job there. You be ready now. And if you want out, there's the door at the back, and you can exit respectfully right now. Not one person did. I said, then we're all in. I got you and I got your back. I said, one other thing I'm going to share with you is while we're there, we're going to come back better than we left. I want you to either renew yourself spiritually, financially, emotionally, or physically. I'm doing spiritual and physical, just so you guys know. Pick any two, any one, all four, I don't care. But I want you to return better than you left. And I started querying people over the next 2 months before we left about it. And you know what? People started glomming onto, you know what? This could be a moment in my life where I can get better. I can actually do things. I can take a moment and I can renew myself in the midst of horror. And I will tell you, it worked because I kept querying. We'd have a little fun with it. You know, we'd do push-up exercises every once in a while, right in the middle of the ICU. Gloves on, man, everybody pop and give me 10. It began to build a camaraderie and a culture of trust. And I had to keep nurturing that because people would start this slippery slope because we would take care of insurgents. We'd take care of bad guys. Sometimes the Marine that was shot and the guy that shot him were on the same chopper. I'd have the nurse fold her arm and says, I'm not going to take care of them. I said, you're going to take care of everybody that lands in that helipad. You're going to save every life that walks in our building. God will sort them out later. Because my job is to protect you from yourself. I will not have you 10 years from now regret something you did in a moment of emotion. My job is to make you brave, to make you feel brave, to keep you safe, and to walk out of here proud of yourself for the rest of your life. It worked. I can just tell you it worked. We had a very high resiliency, whatever the term is, Doug, I'm looking for it. Durability rate. People were able to cope with that in a setting. Now, here's the problem the DoD has. You can do that once, great. The first assignment is, oh my gosh, it's an honor to go. The second assignment, it's my duty. The third one, kiss my ass. I'm moving on. That they haven't dealt with yet. Because you can only take so much of this inhumanity before it begins to touch your soul. And for me, I consider, do I have PTSD? Maybe. I'm overly emotional when I see kids get recognized for heroic service. I'm overly emotional with the national anthem. I'm very protective of the flag. I tear up. I didn't do that before. But you know what? I love it. I'd do it again. I would do it again. And it was the right thing for me to do. And I think I did the right thing for those that I was asked to serve during that time. So that's my story. I loved it. It was rewarding. I still talk about it. The healthcare space doesn't quite understand all of that. And I help them understand, healthcare is about health. That's all it's about. Healthcare is the business side of it. I'm about creating health. And in a perfect world, that's what we do. And that's the way I teach. And it's just the way it should be. So thank you for your time and thank you for the opportunity to share my story.
Thank you, Don. That was wonderful. I remember being so impressed about the fact that your people were just that much healthier when they came back, and that's where it should be. And we're still going to keep grappling with the word resilience. I think Douglas has challenged us there, so has Dr. Springer. So we're going to keep challenging with that. Maybe by the end of this discussion, we'll come up with a word, right? I think it's not a case of being tougher. It's a case of being able to repair from the breaks. So we can just keep wrestling with metaphors around that. But for now, I want to go to Joe. Joe, you were one of the original people to take the lead about behavioral health unit at San Antonio PD. You also filmed that powerful documentary on HBO, which I highly recommend people watch. I loved it. And now at Solution Point Plus, you're consulting with multiple groups on behavioral health. Can you sort of unpack what you're doing? And, this is a segment you have as much time as you'd like to tell your story, talk about what you're doing and the impact that perhaps it's having on people for the good. Unmute. Yeah. Oh, I need to unmute you. Okay, now you can.
All right. You blocked me. Put me in
Blocked you,
timeout,
sorry.
Kim. Come on.
Sorry.
I don't deserve this. Yeah. So thank you. And I am very, very fortunate to have had the opportunity I had. Again, a lot of things in my life until probably 3 years ago, after maybe 9 years of being in treatment, both in the VA and outside of the VA, I learned so much about myself. And again, I come from really, really tragic upbringing with sexual abuse, molestation, starting at 7 years old, and then physical abuse until I left home at 15. And then I had my first kid my senior year of high school, which is what thrusted me into joining the Marine Corps back in 2000, but in June of 2000. And then once 9/11 happened, everything shifted. And so there's so much in my life when I do my own self-reflection of how the hell did I get where I am? And I'm so grateful for the opportunities that I've had, namely within the police department. You know, when the mental health unit started and I was a part of that original 4, while it was just a pilot project, we saw a great need in the community. But there was a fascinating thing that happened probably 3 months into our existence. And it was an officer in crisis. And they said, hey, we want you guys to go talk to this officer. And we were like, well, hold on a second. You know, we just are here for the community members. And they're like, no, you're going to help anybody. And so we thought somehow it was some different level or different skill set. Obviously, we were afraid and nervous to help our own just because we didn't know what the heck we were doing. But then we figured it out and we became really good at it. But I will say that for the first 2 years I was on the unit, I was a massive hypocrite. And just a quick nod to Don, what I would give to go back in time and have you be a leader at any point in my life, Don, I think I would have a much better life than I do today. And so just listening to you talk really does ignite me. But I was showing up to work every day on this mental health unit, telling people in the community, like, this is what you need to do. Just go talk to your doctor, get on your medication, like follow through your treatment plan and your life will be fine. Why aren't you doing these things? And then I would go home completely depressed. This was before my diagnosis through the VA, and I was suicidal. I would just stare at my gun belt on my table and just think, I'm tired of screwing things up in life. I'm by 34, I'm divorced 3 times. I've got 4 kids from 3 different relationships. None of them are in my house now. I'm all alone. I'm drinking more than I should. And it was my last wife that was like, something is seriously wrong with you. That I went to the VA and right away they were like, oh, you're a mess. And so I got diagnosed with PTSD and persistent depressive disorder. And that really like unlocked my life where I started to realize that I am no different than the people I'm serving. I really saw so much of myself and everyone else that I was dealing with out in the street. It didn't matter if they had an addiction to substances. It didn't matter if they were suicidal. It didn't matter what the issue was. I connected with them. My ACEs score is a 9. And so I just had this very unique ability to connect with people. And that's how I went 11 years without using force. That's how we started gaining so much attention to where we had this documentary done. But I realized when we had this unit and officers were killing themselves, that not enough was being done. And I've got a huge problem with the culture of policing in America. I've got a huge problem with how we hire, how we recruit, how we train. I don't like the fact that they consider themselves paramilitary. I think that there needs to be a stark difference between the two. You know, and as someone who's done both, I can tell you it's dangerous because in the police academy, they absolutely prepared me to be afraid of my community. They showed me videos every day of officers being ambushed and shot in the face and killed. And then you graduate terrified while they're saying from their lips, go serve your community. And those two things can't coexist. And so every day I'm afraid. Every traffic stop, I'm terrified. Every call, I'm terrified, thinking I'm going to die. Someone's going to ambush me. And then I had this shift where I was like, wait a minute. Nobody has tried to kill me here in San Antonio. No one has, like, people, if anything, they try and get away from me. They're not trying to bring the fight to me. And I had to shift my own perspective and really do this deep dive of like, what is the point of any of this? And I started challenging everything. And I created this like idea or this perspective that threatened the chain of command because our leaders were not like Don. And so any idea was like, it was seen as intimidating or you're going to get us killed and all this and that. But when you look at 2019, which is when I really I brought this problem to the table, In 2019, we had 49 officers killed in the line of duty, 44 by handgun. And that's a lot, and that sucks. But we had 239 suicides. And yet most police academies are not talking about the single biggest, most dangerous part of being a police officer in this country is unprocessed trauma, is fear, is the lack of willingness to step forward and get help. It's not about the big bad man out there that's going to kill us. It's not. You can't argue with the data. And then people will say, well, yeah, that's because we have great trauma medicine. That's because we have people saving lives of officers getting shot. All that stuff can also be true, but it's like, why are we arguing that suicide is not a problem? And I also don't like the fact that we just wait to measure suicide as like, oh, yeah, it turns out there's a problem. Like, you can look at internal affairs records. You can look at citizen complaints. You can look at so many other layers of why officers do dumb things. And it's almost always going to be tied back to the fact that they have unprocessed trauma. And I'll start to wrap with this, but Dr. John Mann out of Columbia did a great study, a longitudinal study, and he found that in this country, on average, a 20-year police officer is going to respond to 188 traumatic events. And I just find it incredibly unfortunate that every cop in America, every single year, has to shoot their firearm for liability purposes, to stay proficient. We've got to shoot our gun every year. And more than 90% will go through their entire career, never pull their trigger. It's guaranteed that an officer is going to see trauma in any given year, every single year. Why are we not forcing them to go qualify with their own mental health? Again, just like Doc Springer said, not to have gotcha moments, not to punish them, not to sanction anything, not to identify someone and be like, oh, we got to get rid of them, but to truly create a culture of support. And it does start with the top, and it also begins at the bottom, and it has to be from top down. And so my entire mission now is, I'm so fortunate to travel the country, provide my trainings, do keynote speeches, talking about wellness, talking about the prevention side. I love what John said. So much emphasis is placed on being reactive. I really think we need to do more on the preventative side. And it starts down in like public education, and just in every home in America, of understanding what trauma is and starting to normalize these conversations instead of creating like shame and embarrassment about what it means to like be sad. And the last thing is, I think we just have a fundamental lack of understanding what emotions are. And especially for men in this country, we're taught to avoid them or to fear them, as if somehow emotions are a bad thing. And I think we need to kind of reimagine that. And I think if we thought of emotions like a tunnel, most people walk into that tunnel, we get afraid, and we turn around and leave, and we go back to safety. If we could just push through that tunnel and get on the other side, we'd actually process things, and we would realize that all emotions are a vibration in the body. It didn't kill us. It's okay. And I want us to start pursuing our emotions instead of avoiding them, because it's in our avoidance where dangerous behaviors really take root. And so my final goal is to eradicate suicide within first responders. It's a big, hairy, audacious goal, but before I leave this world, I want to see at least one calendar year where nobody that is an active first responder, police, fire, EMS, takes their life. And I would love to lump the military in there as well. But I think it's possible. And I think it's possible by doing things like this and all sharing our stories and our unique connection to this, because I think it's in sharing our stories we realize we have far more in common than not. And so we just have to be willing to talk. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. And please, in this section, guys, don't feel rushed, because we have the time now to really unpack what y'all do. So I'm happy for you to camp out on these topics. And I think that, a few important things have surfaced here. And one of them, related to, sometimes we're dealing with the symptom rather than the cause that's further upstream. And speaking for myself, as I said, I haven't been in combat, but I am a suicide survivor. Twice tried to take my own life, nearly succeeded the second time. And when people talk to me about suicide, I'm like, the suicide's not the problem. It's what created the issue. And trying to deal with that and trying to resolve that is a trauma of its own. And I've learned so much about mental health later in life. And my goal, Joe, I'm going to join you in that, but I personally have taken on a mission to actually try and reduce or significantly impact suicide, particularly in the church. Because surprisingly, for those who are Christians, there's as much suicide in the church as there is outside of the church. So that's my personal passion right now, but to focus on suicide. So Doc Springer, I want to come to you now, because you've treated so many, and I know that your book is having a powerful impact. And you also have some great stories and message about what you do. So I'm giving you the floor, and I'm going to unmute you here. I'm giving you the floor to teach us for a moment and share some of your pearls of wisdom with us, and perhaps again touch on both the upstream issues as well as the trauma itself represents in different categories, not always just one diagnosis.
Sure. So the question about resilience, and I'm not trying to be evasive here, but it's a very complicated question that I deal with extensively in my book, Warrior, in terms of what it is. And just to share, one piece of that, but there's so much more if you can really take a deep dive into that. The individual resilience will never be as strong as the power of tribe, never. And so when Dawn is talking about developing resilience, has been kind of the word that people have been using. What I hear to my ear is that, Dawn, you created a tribe. And that power of that tribe, that circle of trust, people that go through something together. I mean, that's what I tell, for example, circles of Marines I work with, that your true genius as a warfighter is not in your individual capacity as a warrior. It's in the power of the bonds of trust that you would lay your lives down for each other. And when you have that with people, you can do things in life that are so much greater than you can do on your own. And so, it's very important for us to continue to drive at changing the culture, to lead from the front, for leaders like SEAC and the vice chairman to continue to speak up about their own struggles and challenges in public ways. That will create change and create space, but that's going to be slow. I mean, just culture change is something that happens incrementally over time. And so the thing I've been really bumping up against in this past year of trauma, as there have been so many people in crisis due to COVID and other things, is that that's not going to do the job quick enough. And there are realistically going to be so many people who are going to be left in the woods if I am waiting on culture change and the system to be safe and to not punish people when they seek help. And so the big thing that I've done not only is, bringing forward my book Warrior, but I went down to LA and I read it. I did an audio version of it for people that can take it in that way. And then realized even on the audio version, there are people whose lives are too busy, or they won't, read a whole book or have time to listen to a whole book. And so Jennifer Tracy is a friend of mine who's done a lot of work with police officers and first responders and some military, but her main focus has been police and first responders, really gifted in that area, has a ton of insight, and asked me to team up with her and create what we're calling the Master Guide for Mental Wellness. That is going to launch in the next 2 to 4 weeks. What it is it's going to be a way of taking people through the content in the 2 books we've written in bite-sized pieces at their own pace in a truly confidential way. Because to your question, Kim, it's not just the trauma, just the horrors of what warriors or others see and do in war. That's not actually a lot of times at the root of suicide attempts, especially for warfighters. There are other things that we need to better understand: shame, guilt, survivor guilt, moral injury, relationship problems. There are other things that we don't understand fully enough that are actually the story behind the story that I work about and write about. And so this Master Guide for Mental Wellness has a short video for each of the chapters. It has summaries of key points. It has questions to drive reflection that people can journal about or talk with people they trust about to really develop these insights with peers. I think peer support is critical. Don't think it's, a good doc or a peer support specialist or peers. I think it's the power of tribe that has the power that's greater than despair. And so a good doc can be life-changing, but I also think that peer support is absolutely critical for these populations and communities. We train people to go to war in units for a reason, and they can heal in units, and we can walk through moral injury and grief in units. And that is a much more powerful thing when a person creates a partnership that facilitates that power rather than says, I'm the doctor, I have the solution, here's your treatment plan. And so there's also worksheets for people to apply the insights, because I know that warfighters and first responders are people of action. So insight isn't enough. So we've been really thoughtful. We've taken the better part of a year to put this together. And this is something I'm really excited about bringing forward with Jennifer, because it's really something that will be truly confidential and safe and self-paced to help people develop a whole new range of insights that I think can help clear the fog of war. And, John's read my book and Chris has read my book. And so, some of this content, but that's the method of helping people really take that content in and apply it so that they can go through a process of personal growth is really what I'm super excited about doing in this next year and in the years to come.
Thank you, Doc Springer. I'm going to just pause there for a moment before I go to John and just say that, an additional thing that I've learned from Doc Springer is just, as I said, understanding the complexity, but also people who read your books and learn from you in terms of how to interact with people, how to deal with somebody who's dealing with trauma. Because I think sometimes we have this response of, well, I don't understand it, so I'm either going to ignore it, dismiss it, or completely mishandle it. And none of those responses is healthy. So I would really, really encourage and give you a shameless plug saying people should be reading these books. And I know Douglas has shared some great book titles in the chat windows with us. So I hope people are grabbing those because they are all really good books. But now to go to John, I'm going to take you off mute, John. Thank you, Doc Springer. John, who would have thought that a tough Navy SEAL would end up being a mindfulness and meditation teacher? But I know that you have just had a significant journey of your own. So please, as I say, take the time to tell us your story and the difference you're making and what you're doing to actually help.
Sure. And first, yes, I do have to also give another plug for Doc Springer's book. I've read it twice, and my sister is a licensed clinical social worker for the VA, and I sent it to her because I do believe that it should be mandatory reading for anyone that is connected to a service member or a veteran in some capacity. I think, and I saw Doug mentioned On Combat. On Combat is almost mandatory reading for service members, or at least within the special operations community. And I think on the flip side of it, Doc's book should be mandatory reading for those of us who are transitioning out. So John McCaskill, I'll tell you a little bit about who I am and why I am where I am now. So I served for 24 years, again, as I mentioned at the beginning, within the special operations community for 17 of that. And my first deployment was an ugly one. I was connected with the Lone Survivor, Operation Red Wings, the book that you may have read or the movie that you may have seen. I had a connection with all those guys on that operation. And for those who are not familiar with that particular operation, we ended up losing 11 SEALs and 8 Army Night Stalkers in one day. And I knew all those 11 SEALs and many of their families and wives, children, et cetera. And I was actually due to be on that operation and ended up getting pulled off of it and volunteered, quite honestly, to be pulled off of it at the last minute. And then that all went down. And because of that, there was a lot of questioning my survival. Why am I still here? Am I good enough? Why did those amazing men perish and I am still here? Why did those men who had wives and children perish? And I was married at the time, but had no children. And I felt that their legacy was stolen from them in their being their lives ending too early. I honestly didn't even know it was survivor guilt until years later, because like I mentioned at the beginning of the panel, I took a lot of that emotion and I boxed it up because that's what I thought good special operators did. And Joe has spoken about the bravado and the stigma that surrounds mental health, specifically, I won't say necessarily among men, but specifically among type A personality, like top runners, those who have this false sense of bravado, be they men or women. There is a stigma that surrounds it. And I boxed it up and put it aside, like I mentioned at the beginning, saying, hey, I'll come back to that later. I flew back from Afghanistan with Michael Murphy and Danny Dietz, and I met Michael Murphy's family at the airport there in Delaware, rented a car, drove home to Virginia Beach, and went and saw Danny Dietz's widow, and brought her the flag that he had been brought out of the field under, and spent time with her and mourned with her, and then went back to see my wife at the time. I've since remarried, but my wife at the time, I acted as though nothing had happened. I got home after being deployed, after seeing all that, after flying home with Danny and Murph, and acted as though nothing had happened. And she knew something was different, and she even told me something was different, and I refused to admit it. Because of what we've talked about here, again, the stigma that surrounds it. And then also in the back of my mind, I thought, hey, if I admit that I'm struggling with something, I'm going to have my security clearance pulled. I'm going to have my leadership position pulled, all this, none of which is true if you self-admit that you're having problems or challenges, rather. So anyhow, fast forward several years, I'm on multiple medications to address anxiety, to address stress. And that medication helped to a point, but it actually numbed me to anything. It numbed me to the pain, but it also numbed any enjoyment. And I was finding that I was basically going through life as an empty shell, just trying to get from point A to point B, point A being birth, point B being death. And I even considered accelerating getting to point B. So I considered suicide. I considered, hey, do I deserve to be here over those men those brothers that I had lost? Doc Shauna mentioned the tribe. I felt as though they were a part of my tribe and that I had lost them and that I didn't deserve to be here. So I considered taking my life. And because I was considering that, I ended up seeking out more counseling and eventually got introduced to meditation and mindfulness. And long story short, I do feel that I attribute meditation and mindfulness to allowing me to come off the medication with a C, and I turned to meditation with a T, and was able to find a sense of fulfillment, but at the same time, also find a sense of peace. That survivor guilt that I had been battling with, the moral injury that I had been battling with for what I had done, the survivor guilt for what I hadn't done, that bubbled to the surface, and then I was able to address it properly and effectively with the counselors. So now I feel it's my obligation to pay it forward, to share these techniques, these practices with as many people as will listen. But I also feel it's my obligation to share that seeking mental health support is not a bad thing. Seeking and maintaining your mental fitness is not a bad thing. It is my goal to break that stigma, and I do that for both men and women, but I do try to focus on those who have the type A false bravado personalities, be they men or women. I believe that is done as a leader within the military, as a first responder. I did this towards the end of my career. I had a calendar that sat behind me at my desk. And if I was going to a mental health appointment, I put it in big red and I wrote mental health. And I used to have guys come up to me and say, hey man, everything okay? You all right? And I was like, yeah, man, I'm just maintaining my mental fitness. Just like I had run that morning, I was going to go see a counselor, not necessarily because I was addressing any problems. Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't, but either way, I was going to seek mental health support. And my goal is to break that stigma. And again, I did that as a leader in the military, and now I'm trying to do that. I get I get razzed by some of my brothers from the special operations community because I'm so prolific on social media these days, but I do it for a reason. I'm out there to share that these practices are okay, that mental health is something that we all need to be talking about. Hence my being here with you all today. I do that via social media. I have a podcast with a buddy of mine called Men Talking Mindfulness, where we address these things, where we address, like Joe was talking about, feelings. It's almost as though among men, the only acceptable emotions that we have to express are stoicism or anger. And that's not the truth. We can be happy, we can be sad, we can be scared, we can be vulnerable, and that's all part of this human experience that we, as men and women, both enjoy if we allow ourselves to. So that's what I'm doing now. And I also want to address what Doc mentioned, that tribe piece in resilience. Absolutely, I feel that there is much more resilience in a group than there is in the single individual. But where we struggle, or so many of us struggle, is when we leave the military or we leave that tribe, whatever that tribe may be, if it's a tribe of first responders, if it's a tribe of sports team, if it's a tribe of military unit, when we leave that, identifying another tribe is what we have to do. We have to put ourselves in another tribe that we can relate to, and maybe relating in a different way. Sure, you may not relate to your church group about what you saw on the battlefield, but you can relate to that group, or you can relate to a sports team, athletic team, whatever. It is incumbent upon us. We have to be proactive in identifying what our next tribe is. And that, I believe, is going to help us to be more resilient on the outside. And that's where I think so many people struggle when they leave a tribe that they have been a part of for so many years. So that's all I've got. Thanks, Kim.
Wow, John, thank you so much. I so appreciate each of you being willing to come back and tell all these stories that I know that I've heard and are just so powerful. And I know too, John, that the real SEALs don't like the SEAL team on TV. But I have to say that, I have watched all seasons of that. So hear me out here, guys, okay? I haven't been in battle. So what I know about battle, I learned vicariously in these so-called fictional programs. Like I watched 6 on the History Channel that got me hooked on military shows. So now I watch cop shows and I watch military shows. But the SEAL team, what you're just talking about, I have seen every one of these scenarios play out in these guys' lives. I've seen, Master Chief try to retire, doesn't find a tribe, comes back in. I've seen, the second guy, I can't think of his name right now, who was brutally tortured and refuses to tell his wife about what happened to him and how he doesn't heal until he does. I think it was Ray. So I've actually followed these guys enough that they're part of me. And when Medal was killed in the last episode, so sorry, spoiler alert, he was killed in the back, I was sobbing. And I'm like, Kim, this is just fiction. I'm like, yeah, but this stuff really happens. So say what you may, it's my small way of learning about the tough realities of what goes on. And thanks to Joe and his HBO show, I cried a lot in that show too. So I've been exposed to this. So I would say that, as a representative of the general public, saying, I think we need to get educated, at least to deepen our understanding, to be able to help returning warriors and first responders and medical professionals and people who are dealing with trauma find their tribe, find what works, and not to allow the stigma to continue to attach itself to this. So thank you. I just wanted to share some thoughts that had come up for me. Scott, last but not least, goodness, as I said, you are the last kid to come into this party, and we just met this week, and I'm so incredibly blessed to have you here with us today. And I know you've been with the fire department a long time, and you've recently taken a new position in special operations, which you can tell us about. And Scott and I also share, I met Scott through what we call the 3VQ, or 3 Vital Questions community, with David Emerald. And David Emerald introduced me to Scott after I finished my certification in that program. So Scott is very usefully using the 3VQ framework in some of his work. So feel free to address that and include it and explain that. So tell us about what you and South Metro Fire Rescue are doing to help around these issues.
Well, Kim, thank you. And I have to say, these are some hard acts to follow. And I'm humbled by the stories that I hear from everyone, and just how humble everyone else is with what they've learned. Some of my background is very similar to Joe's. We talk about tribe. I've been in a tribe since the age of 16, and I actually got in the fire service as a third generation firefighter. And I had a fairly abusive father. And it was interesting. His father was a fire chief, so he never saw his father. And yet he signed my application at 16 to go in. And between some of the things that happened with him and the abuse, as my military colleagues here can attest to, if you go in the military and you're type A personality and you're a go-getter and you're an overachiever, you're going to be successful in the military. And if you are that people pleaser, and I'm a recovering people pleaser, by the way, you go in and, you do everything you can to learn every job. And, the bar is set. In special operations, it's set exponentially higher for a very good reason. And I did that. So I left a very dysfunctional family, went into the military, and found a tribe. And when I went over to Germany, I was fortunate enough to ski on the Army ski team over there against the Air Force, and I found another tribe. So I got married at the age of 19, and given my family background, I had no business getting married at the age of 19, but I did anyways. Wonderful woman. I still love her and we still get along, but that was a few divorces ago. And I left the military. I got out of the military to be that pleaser for my father, that abusive person, to buy his business, ruined a perfectly good military career. And when I got back there, I realized it was exactly what I'd been before, and it was a total smokescreen. So I ended up moving out to Colorado after I came back from the Gulf War, and I had gone away in a reserve unit. So after I got out of the military and went through that reserve unit, went to the Gulf, I had another tribe of people that I was fairly unfamiliar with. But we performed a lot of interdiction missions in areas halfway between Safwan and Baghdad, and dealing with multiple services, dealing with multiple people, and really learning how to collaborate. But when I came back, I decided life was too short to live in Connecticut. Just the pretentiousness of the people that were there, the lack of understanding about life itself and what I had just seen. So I moved out to Colorado and I started testing with fire departments. And I got hired here at the age of 29 and had my daughter. And again, I was not the ideal father. I was not the ideal husband. In part because I didn't really have a lot of good role models. My family tree was more like a wreath. So it was really hard for me to understand. And I didn't have that self-awareness that we're all learning now. I'm 54, and thankfully I started figuring this out at the age of 48 or 49. But I did a lot, to Joe's point, I did a lot of self-reflection and work on myself, whether it was the inevitable you or mindfulness or pick your methodology. And what I realized was that, the vicarious trauma that we see in the military and the fire service, it's real. And it's devastating to the very people that are trying to help everyone else. I would venture to say that anybody, not only in this podcast, but anybody that sees this afterwards, that was either in the military, fire service, healthcare, law enforcement, pick your person that's that worker. A lot of us got into these professions and helping other people so that we could bury our own stuff. We feel a lot better when we're helping somebody else. And until we take that good hard look, like Joe said, at ourselves, and we do the work and we figure out the why, and we get back to the being abused, whether it's physically, emotionally, sexually as a child, until we get back to those areas of trauma and not live there. We can't camp out there. But if we can realize what they are, then we have the ability to move forward, and we have the ability to process through some things. And to your question about the 3 vital questions, Kim, what Kim's referring to is there are 3 vital questions that David talks about in his book. And the first one is, where are you putting your focus? Are you focusing on problems or are you focusing on outcomes? And there's a lot of different ways that you can talk about that. You know, is a glass half empty? Is a glass half full? Are we looking for brown? Are we looking for green? Pick, you know, your ideology. But no matter how bad the trauma is, we have a choice. We're always a choice. We can focus on the problem or we can focus on the trauma. That string of bad calls that I told you about, we had a 13-year-old kid that hung himself with his Taekwondo belt. And in his note, he had said that it was because his parents wouldn't let him go to Taekwondo. He was found by his 17-year-old brother. As I said, we send a battalion chief on every cardiac arrest. So I went, and I was one of the first ones there. So I'm doing CPR on him. Now, my kids are grown. They're in their 20s. 3 of the members of the crew that showed up had 13-year-old boys. So you can imagine, you know, we have to strip the clothes off, defibrillate, do CPR. You know, we're doing the things we have to do. And at some point, that's going through everyone's mind. And to Don's point, knowing your people, whether it's taking them home after they've had too many drinks and saying, hey, look, it's okay. Thank you for calling me. But knowing your people so you know when something is wrong. And I know Joe has spent a lot of time in that area, and I did a little reading up on him. It's so important to know our people, to know the people that are around us so we can know when something is not quite right. But when we follow that up after that call, we have those conversations. And someone had mentioned that, you know, it's okay to do that, but that's not always possible. I would argue that as leaders, it's our job to do that. And that's why I got involved in this. I think it's critical that we show the humility to say, you know what, that call bothered me. That call sucked. And the first time that ever happened to me, when I was a brand new paramedic out here, my daughter was 6 months old and I was going through paramedic school. And we had a 6-month-old drowning. And they said that the 6-month-old crawled into the pool. And I'm sure everyone here is smart enough to know that the 6-month-old didn't crawl in the pool. The father was screaming at us in Spanish, telling us we were killing his kid. It ended up being a homicide. But when I got in the back of the bus to intubate this kid, my preceptor said, hey, your daughter's about 6 months old. How much do you think the child weighs so we could administer drugs? And I'm sure you could imagine I wasn't very effective after that. But it's those little things that add up. And, you know, from a law enforcement perspective, I went on a teenager that had shot himself. He was of Muslim descent, and his father had caught him surfing porn. And his father told him before he went to school that he was going to have to go around to all the neighbors and tell them what he did. And he was so worried about what they would think of him that he shot himself in the head. One of my good friends that's a police officer has a son that age, and she was the first one on scene trying to revive this kid who was missing a lot of his cranium. So she couldn't see. She had the blinders on. So my point to those examples are, in 38 years in the military and fire service, I've seen a lot of things that I don't want to see, but I utilize those 3 vital questions. And that first one, you know, focusing on problems or outcomes. In that last case that I told you about, the father hadn't told the mother what he did. The father came home and found him, and then the mother had to come home, and we had to witness. We let them in a car. We had to witness the father telling the mother what he did and what the consequences of that action were. And it destroyed our crew because we saw her, we saw the agony that she was in. So the second part of that, the second question is, you know, the first one is, are we looking at the problems or outcomes? And then the second one is, how are we focusing on that? Some of you may be familiar with Cartman's drama triangle, which is the victim, persecutor, rescuer. I like to joke around and say I'm a recovering Catholic, so I understand that really well. But that victim, persecutor, rescuer, you know, that victim's a person that's always, you know, woe is me, it sucks to be me. That persecutor's the one, well, it's everyone else's fault. It's not my fault. You know, the rescuer it could be alcohol, it could be drugs, it could be addictions to, you know, sex or whatever. And we can all have that drama triangle, but the antidote to that is the coach, the creator, the challenger. So focusing on outcomes as a coach, a creator, a challenger, way better than focusing on problems like a victim, persecutor, rescuer. And I found in a lot of my after action reviews with my crews that I frame it that way, not as formal, obviously, and I kind of self-deprecate or throw myself under the bus first. So they realize that it's okay for it to suck, like I said earlier. It's okay to really be struggling with something. And like I said, we just finished a documentary on one of my paramedics who will never come back to line. This guy is my hero as a paramedic, as a person, as an advocate for his own patients. And he got assaulted by somebody. And that individual, we spent hours and hours, and we went to court, and that individual got jail time. Doesn't get Todd back online. But that particular call, I was doing something similar to this, and I didn't have my radio up loud enough to hear the call. And the dispatchers didn't call me on my iPhone and say, hey, this is going down. You should probably get over there. So it's that Swiss cheese model that we hear about, all the holes line up. And it wasn't necessarily because I wasn't on the call, but especially the military leaders in the group can attest to, if something happens and you're not there, even if there's no way it would have helped if you were there, it's going to haunt you. And when it's your hero, to John's point, it sucks even worse. And you get in some really, really dark places. My wife is actually on this podcast right now, and she will tell you, I talked to her about that when I got home. I didn't talk about the details of the call, but I was devastated because I missed the boat. Even if I didn't have a ticket to the boat, I missed the boat. So as a result of that call, the third vital question is, what steps are you taking to look at the outcomes and focus on being a coach, creator, challenger? It's the baby steps. It's the little things. To Joe's point, the things that he did to dig him out of that hole that he was in. And hats off to you for doing that. And I have a feeling everybody on this call has done something like that. So what I'll leave you with is it's about awareness. It's about people like us. And Kim, thank you for doing this. It's about us sharing this information. It's about us talking with each other. And, it's once you do it, it's easy to do it. The ones that it's difficult to do it on, the guys that have been cops or firefighters or military officers for 25 years that think, oh, no, that's okay. I'll just rub some dirt on it. Or, oh, here's an 800 number. Just call me if you're having issues. And to John, to your point, I had a NATO top secret clearance. And the last thing I was going to do was call an 800 number and say, hey, can you put me on Prozac or lithium? Because that's what we were all told, was they don't do that or you're going to lose your security clearance. So Kim, thank you very much for the honor of picking me to be on the panel. I'm the new guy, and I am just so excited to be talking to everybody today.
Thank you so much, Scott. That was amazing. And, I think it was meant to be, because you did a great job of pulling everybody's stories into some sort of consolidated summary. And I think that, the feeling I have right now is one of hope, and saying that there are these seeds. So going back to my comment about, starting epidemics for good, I think starting an epidemic of it being okay and to reach out for help and have good alternative solutions for mental wellness in all of these capacities is really the ultimate goal. And certainly I feel a sense of hope, and I hope that when people listen to this, as we said, it's going to be recorded. This is going to be available on YouTube in perpetuity, so people can find it and point to it. But I think that just raising awareness, and then those who are in these services knowing that they can come out from behind these curtains of shame and guilt and recognize that. I think one of the key things that we spoke about for a while that I appreciated is the importance of people finding a tribe. And that applies in any circumstances, the same as building a foundation of trust and transparency. I always say transparency builds trust. And I talk about this to organizational leadership, but how critical it is in this environment with people who are suffering from trauma. And interestingly, a leadership team I'm working with right now on their own stumbled into the reality of past trauma finding itself to the table in some of the conflict in the workplace, and finding safe places within the workspace for people to talk about trauma and not let this just be, as we said, put aside, or as my dad used to always say, let me just put it in the black box. Everything was just in a black box that he would never to be unlocked. So this has been fabulous. And I know we're running a little early, which is great, because I would like to go to some sort of a wrap up right now and say, you know, in round 4, to say where to now, because we know this has been an incredible discussion. And I think people who are listening are going to be impacted in many ways. So I want to go back around the panel and say to anybody listening, whether they are in it or whether they know somebody who's in it, or is it a topic that they've just come to learn about, what would be 1 or 2, even 3 takeaways? And as Scott said, baby steps, which is a term I'm familiar with too from the 3VQ community, but what baby steps can we take? It may be something as small as order Doc Springer's book. But, you know, what would be the next steps that you'd like to see people take as a result of listening? And I'm going to sort of go background in reverse order, actually, and start with you, Don. I'm going to come back to you, Don. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Okay, there we go. This has just been fabulous in sharing different points of view. And I love the unique perspectives, because we all see this from so many different ways. And I just have to preface that. I've had a very narrow point of view. Mine was from leading in a very challenged space. And I shared that with you, and the burden and obligation of that, and the responsibility, which is massive for the well-being of others, is overwhelming. Now, I want to go back to what's been in the chat and what's been in these. I've had trouble, and I think through this, the takeaways would be find a tribe and renew your purpose that aligns with your passions. I've had a hard time with that, guys. I will share that with you. In my particular career field in healthcare, you know, everybody claims they're passionate, but they're passionate about things other than I am. I'm about healing people. I'm about taking care of others. My job and my purpose is to serve those who serve others. That's what I love to do. I'm funneling that right now for me in teaching and coaching and training, and a few speaking gigs I do here and there, because there is a massive need. And I'm not talking those who've served in the military. I'm talking our young people in this nation have lost focus. They're starving for purpose. They're starving to find a way to serve, and they don't know how. I'm finding that through my students. They actually just glom onto this because they go, finally, we can do something really important. Well, that, by the way, protects you from the trauma that we've talked about in many other ways, because you can be focused on serving in spite of the barriers and challenges. So find the tribe. I love that. Renew your purpose with passion. And then find a means or a vehicle to share that. That's kind of what I'm working on. And it's always a journey. You know, I'm not a young guy, but I won't stop caring until they plant me. So it's just the way it is. So thank you for the time today.
Yeah, thank you, Don. And thank you for that contribution. And like you, I know that there is this hunger for passion and purpose. So people like myself that help people reconnect with what their life purpose is, and then how to align themselves to that passion. And as all of you know, I heal people's minds. Other people heal their bodies, but I'm about helping people reprogram their minds, and many times stumble into issues of trauma, which have set me on this path of learning more for myself. So thank you for reminding us of that. And yeah, our young people are struggling. And I think that sometimes, again, we're in the public hat here, sometimes our definition of trauma, we kind of almost diminish what trauma is to people. So your trauma is not bigger than my trauma. Trauma is trauma. And if it's traumatic for that individual, it's their trauma. You can't say, well, I'll get over it. Seriously, you know, that's not an issue. And I've seen some of that generationally, saying, well, you haven't lived through what we've lived through, so stop whining. And I think that is almost, besides being disrespectful, as I said, it's diminishing. And I think it just forces people back into the bubble of shame. So if nothing else, I hope that some of this exposure will hit just trauma as a topic. And I know that I've said to some of you, maybe trauma is the next panel discussion because it's such a big topic. But let me stop talking, because it's not about me. Joe, let's go to you. I see I've taken you off mute. Some baby steps, some next things that you'd like people to take from this.
Yeah, first things first, Kim, I think you're right. We do have this, it's like the oppression Olympics. It becomes like who's had it worse. We want to compete. But also, Kim, in your spare time, you should probably just throw together a quick like LLC. I think we've got a great traveling group here. Kim, John, Doc Springer, Scott, and Don. I think we could do incredible work. Just get an RV, travel around the country, and completely heal people.
We'll start an epidemic. Right?
Yes. Well, and you're right, right? So we hear these things of like the contagion effect, fear, calm, kindness. And I'm a firm believer in the ripple effect. You know, I was just talking this morning in a meeting I was having. I was sharing this story that, you know, we have a lot of us, and I think, I don't remember exactly who said it, sorry, but about this idea that we can't heal things from 20,000 feet. I think it was Doc Springer. It's in the trenches work. And in the work that I do, there's a lot of people that will come and say, hey, like, what's the data? Can you provide us with outcomes that your training or your programs, what are the anticipated outcomes from doing these? And I know it's not popular, but I say, look, I don't really worry about that stuff. For me, it really, like, the wins are in the anecdotes and it's in the stories. And yesterday I had a guy who he's an Olympic, like, power lifter, bodybuilder guy. I mean, he's massive. He's a huge, strong guy, police officer, a beautiful beard. I mean, he's Spaniard. He's a beautiful man. But he texted me and he goes, he's been a cop for 19 years now. And he said, I had my first therapy appointment today, and I just want to give you the credit. And my homework was I had to go learn the difference between different types of guilt, and specifically neurotic guilt. And he said, but I want to thank you for showing me what toughness really is. And I love you. And this is just another man. And I'm like, this is why I do what I do, because I'm not tracking that as data. But I met with him this morning from that text last night, and he was with another guy. And I just said, hey, the guy he was with named Philip. I said, Philip, did he tell you about this story that he went to therapy last night? He said, yeah. And I said, and this is what I'm talking about. Like, I champion for this stuff. I talk about it. I share my own story. Now he went into therapy. He showed up to work this morning, told you about the fact that he's now getting help and what it's doing for him. And now I'm sure it's piquing your interest. And even if it doesn't, there's going to be someone that, like, someone catches it. And that's the contagion that I'm trying to create and be a part of as well, just as everyone on this panel. And I'm really, really excited about that because, again, I think, you know, we've all heard, especially in the military, knowledge is power. Knowledge is power. Rah, rah, rah. But I really think knowledge about self is self-empowerment. And we can all show up and help people and do all this great service for other people, but at what cost? And if we're not willing to kind of flip the mirror around and look at ourselves first and really understand who we are, what our triggers are, you know, the things that are going to create that angst within us, then how should we ever expect other people to, one, either follow us, two, take our advice, or three, listen to anything that we would guide them to do if we ourselves are not willing to do what we're expecting of others? And so I think we have to really take ownership, understand the responsibility that we have of being leaders, even if it's of one person, as mentors, as entrepreneurs, as leaders in the field of whatever it is we're doing. Whether it's active duty, as veterans, whatever it is. I really think that it's important that we understand our own individual responsibility. And Don, I'm going to need you to pause time. You can't get any older on me, my friend, because you bring an incredible light to this world. And I imagine the impact that you have on people when you are in their space, just because the energy you have, I'm sensing via this virtual Zoom call. So anyway, Kim, thank you. And I will end with this, because I know you asked for solutions. What you did for me personally, Kim, from using that great proprietary assessment tool that you gave me, but then that one-on-one coaching after, I would say that it was probably the equivalent of maybe 4 years of therapy for me. And that's where I really understood the value of coaching. And now I see both as equally beneficial. Therapy to me is anything of the past to process trauma. Coaching is how you can level up your performance or experience from today forward. And I think both are incredibly important. And so, Kim, what you did for me personally from our coaching session and that connection that we had, and the fact that you were in this first meeting ever, as a complete stranger willing to share your story with me and tell me how you connected with this. And we hit it off the way we did. I'm grateful because, again, I think that all of our power lies within our story and our willingness to share it. So thank you again for allowing me to be a part of this.
Yeah, well, thank you, Joe. I've just loved listening to your stories, and I so appreciate what each of you is bringing to the table. So I'd actually kind of like to go to John next. And after John, I'll go back to Doc Springer, and I'll unmute you here. And some final thoughts on some next steps that people can take.
I'll keep this pretty short and sweet. I think that what we all need to do is have more compassion for one another, have compassion for what other people are experiencing, understand that most people are giving their best. They're giving their all to be the best they can be. And then the compassion side is wanting to help them come out of whatever it is they're experiencing. And we can do that by sharing tools, sharing resources that we are aware of, sharing what it is we're doing. So if we're seeking mental health support, we let them know, hey, look, I'm going, maybe not actively, but like I said, with the calendar, or if they ask, let them know that you are seeing a counselor for yourself and your own mental health, and making it known to help to break that stigma. And then last, this is a last resort, but what I'd like to do in my phone, I have the suicide prevention hotline plugged into my phone so that if I need it personally, I can dial it. I'm hoping that I will never need that again, but if I need it, it's there. I don't have to Google it. It's there, but I can also share it. Should I need to share it, it's there. And that number is 1-800-273-TALK. That's 1-800-273-TALK. And that's, if you are in a crisis, it's there for you to use. And I think that's important that everyone has that number memorized or in their phone so that they can share it. So I told you I'd keep it short and sweet, and that's that. Joe, I do have the RV, so if we want to get the traveling team going, we can do that.
yeah. And we just said, so those of you who don't know, John and his wife have just had a baby girl, and I said, yeah, we'll go on the trip if we can take her along, because
Oh, she's guaranteed to come.
Oh yeah. No, that sounds fun. I think maybe we sparked an idea here. So thank you for that, John. And
I'm still smiling about what Joe said. A beautiful beard. That concept, such a mental picture of okay, I might never look at a beard quite the same. A beautiful beard. What this panel is it's we don't know each other, all of us yet, but there is this tribe of healers, and we all have these beautifully complementary skills and areas that we work in. And, frankly, the need is so great. I never really think about it as a competition. I think about it as, we could all work ourselves for the rest of our lives, and, there would still be a need for healers. John, I'm going to plug you because I know that you and Teresa are about to launch something that I see as highly complementary to what Jennifer Tracy and I are launching with our Master Guide for Mental Wellness. You and Teresa are launching something that's going to scale the work you do and run meditation and mindfulness sessions. You're the right source for that message. As somebody who's already truly punched the badass card, you get to be whoever you are and have a full range of emotions and teach us all how to do that mindfulness work. So I'm excited about what you're launching there. I have really had a realization in the past couple of years as I've been doing work with Stella. Stella is the organization that I work for as chief psychologist. And this is separate from my work with my book and my speaking, but that trauma is a biological injury. And we can see it on a brain scan if we have the right brain scan. And so I have ambitious goals for the kind of healing and the shift in the paradigm that I would really like to see in the next few years. To me, it's become very clear that there needs to be a new standard for care, which is you address the biological injury. Because if you don't, people are not calm and they're not in control in their own bodies. And meditation and mindfulness is absolutely part of that too. I think you address the physical injury and you do the work. You do the work to learn how to regulate your system, how to get yourself down-regulated with mindfulness and meditation. That's not my expertise. That's what John's working on. And my part of this is really the psychological insights that can clear the fog of war and give people that new line of insight. I was just at a warrior retreat in Texas a couple days ago, and the theme for this year was, they asked me, like, what are the things that predict thriving after the military? And it really is three things. It's connection, it's purpose, and it's warriorship. And connection, we've talked about a lot today. That's the power of tribe. That's taking off your armor, your emotional armor, and being truly able to say and be whoever you are with the people that you love and trust, having that authentic and genuine connection. And there are ways to learn to have that, to get in the skill of having that. And that's, all of, what I really am working at with what I'm launching and in my book. Then there's also purpose, and people they're wired for purpose. Not everybody, but warriors and first responders are wired to serve, and they become unhappy if they don't reconnect with that. So reconnecting with that and rebuilding and redefining a new mission is what that is about. And that's why we call our website redefineyourmission.com. It's based on the need that we understand that some people have for purpose and as well as connection. And the third thing is warriorship. People need to have a meaty challenge, and they need to make sacrifices in the service of the values and the people they hold sacred. And without that, people become unhappy. And so looking at how do you find warriorship? How do you discover it in ways that are different, but essentially similar in the essence of what tapped you in the military becomes critical after the military. So that's, from really a line of work that Jason Roncaroni and I wrote a 400-page manual on the identity crisis around transition. It's called Beyond the Military. That was the book I brought out before Warrior that I also wanted to mention because it really does address that need to find your new version of warriorship and move forward with that. So I think, the call to action is learn about the things that the people on this call are doing. We are a healing tribe, and we all have a role to play in what's going to come in the next few years, to very much include you, Kim, and the coaching that you're doing and the work that you're doing, convening people that have something to speak to on these really complicated issues.
Well, thank you, Doc Springer. As I said, I feel humbled sitting at the foot of such greatness in this group. And again, just to take away these little sort of burning embers, sorry to use that metaphor with Scott on the line, but burning embers to create these sort of wildfires of hope, because that's what it is. It's about raising awareness and putting it out there. So that said, now that I've started this wildfire, I'm going to bring in our firefighter here and unmute Scott, and you can wrap us up with some next steps from your perspective.
Sure. I will say that I have to give a shout out to my wife, because when I started doing this work on myself, we had consulting work that we did for people. And these were people that were getting billed out at tremendous amounts of money, but couldn't manage their personal lives out of a paper bag. And we realized that we had to help people get out of their own way. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but when we're stuck, we're in our own way. So we threw around a bunch of words, and what we wanted to do is we wanted to empower people. Once we figured out we wanted to empower them to evolve, that's what we named our company. So our company is Empowered to Evolve. And David and Donna's workshops were some of the first ones that we went to. But to me, actionable items that someone can take away right now are, as I mentioned, as a leader or as someone in a tribe, to use Shauna's words, know your people. Whether your tribe is your family, it's your corporation, it's your entrepreneurial ventures. Know the people that are around you so you know when something is not right. Reach out, as Joe did. Ask the questions. They're difficult questions, but that's what we have to do. And then reach out to your colleagues and collaborate. We're a tribe now that's collaborating, and we're hopefully helping a bunch of other people. And that's going to experience exponential growth, at some point. But if we reach out to people and we're vulnerable with them, then they understand that it's not just them. They're not going through it by themselves. And develop a plan. Make that plan multifaceted. Again, people's teams, organizations, whatever it is, develop a plan and have it multifaceted. We have a very robust program One of the gentlemen that's actually in the podcast just sent me a note, and he was talking about a mutual friend named Nick who worked with 10th Group down at Fort Carson. We took him away from Special Forces. And when we went down there to go see them at their range, we heard about it because he did this. He works with vicarious action planning and stuff with the military. He now shares an office next to mine. And he came here and he's doing 360s on all of our battalion chiefs and then our other chiefs. And he's the guy, he has the good looking beard too. Like everyone here has beard envy because we can't grow them, but he has one and it's a knockout. He's kind of our man crush, but he can ask those difficult questions and he can do it in such a way that you don't feel like you just got, knocked over, but it's making a difference. So asking the tough questions, creating that plan, collaborating with the other people in your tribe, and get them involved in the process. If you have someone that's struggling, get them involved in how we can move this forward. We actually started a brand new division. There's only 4 divisions, and our organization is about 700 people, 30 stations, about 50,000 calls a year. We stood up an employee services division, and part of my job is as an XO for that and another division. And we brought in Nick Bartley, and we brought in a lot of other people, and we're spending a lot of money on it. But it has the things we talked about. We have the EAP, we have the peer support. Because if you haven't been there before, especially if you're in the military and you were in combat veterans typically don't want to talk to anybody but another combat veteran, especially if they haven't done their work yet. So we're doing a lot of those things. I'm happy to share more information with people. I've been told, and I believe we have the most robust wellness program of a fire department in the country. So we're very blessed and fortunate to have that, and I'm happy to share it. Thank you very much, Kim, and everybody for today.
Yeah, thank you, Scott. And I did want to say that, I know we're going to record this and we're going to do a post-production, but I will make sure that when we post this on YouTube and we keep the landing page up, that it has information on how to connect with each of you in the programs that you're doing. So if I don't already have those links, if you wouldn't mind just sending me the most important 1 or 2 links you'd like to have on the page, where people can connect what you're doing. We'll capture a lot from the chat window, which of course does record. So as hosts, we're able to get that text back and be able to get all those book titles documented. I've also had a thought as I listened to you all talking, as I said, and this is on the heels of my interview with the epidemic leadership author. I think we do need to start an epidemic around mental wellness in general. And this is like the protect and serve branch. And perhaps we need to just start the community and start the tribe and continue the conversations by building these networks that cross different channels. So stand by for information on that. I know there's things out there, so I'm not reinventing the wheel, but if anything, I want to start connecting the dots and bringing these communities closer together so that we're all creating these healthy, dynamic epidemics. So thank you all for your time. I know this has been a heavy lift for many of you. You are busy. Thank you for those of you who hung in here and listened to the whole panel. I hope you enjoyed it. Stand by for more information. If you've registered, you as a registrant will get an email of all information posted. And otherwise, just keep a check on that wethinkyou.com/mental-wellness. And any information about this tribe, we will continue to post on there. So thank you all. I guess that's a wrap, and we're 4 minutes before the hour. So well-timed panel. Thank you. Thank you. And thank you, Jean, our co-host, for managing the back end for us. Jean is also a phenomenal coach and consultant. So thank you. And that's a wrap.